Well, good afternoon, and thanks for watching the Market Day Report. I'm Janet Adkison. Many rural communities struggle to provide clean water, and today on Capitol Hill, a House subcommittee is hearing testimony from both community leaders and representatives of various water companies on possible ways to improve rural America's critical water infrastructure. RFD-TV's D.C. Bureau Chief Sarah Mock joins us now live from Washington with more. Sarah?
Well, thanks, Janet. As you said, Congress is getting kind of back into the swing of things here in Washington, and infrastructure is back at the top of the agenda. Of course, after President Trump made that promised $1 trillion, hopefully, investment in infrastructure going forward. And in the wake of recent disasters, this kind of discussion becomes even more important. Now, today's hearing was focused on water infrastructure, which covers everything from drinking water availability to, of course, wastewater disposal. Now, a lot of the experts today talked about the fact that though this is an incredibly important and very costly issue, not a lot of people know about it.
Despite its obvious importance, out of sight, out of mind best describes the nation's attitude toward water infrastructure. But the reality is that much of America's waste and water infrastructure is nearing the end of its useful life, and over $1 trillion is needed over the next 20 years to rebuild and rehabilitate these systems. However, our water infrastructure challenges cannot be solved simply by providing more federal funding. Rather, a fundamental shift away from the traditional approaches must occur through a combination of new sources of funding, greater accountability, and improved governance.
Now, of course, the water crisis in Flint, Michigan was on a lot of people's minds today during today's hearing, but it was added to kind of the more recent impacts of storms and massive flooding in Florida, Texas, and of course, throughout the Gulf Coast. Lawmakers from these areas and from other rural communities asked experts about solutions to preventing these kind of complete outages of water and wastewater systems. They were told to focus on resiliency, which of course will require increased investments on the federal level, both for maintenance and for programs like the State Revolving Loan Fund. But experts also focused on what utilities could do on their own to mitigate the effects of these kinds of disasters.
Number one, monitoring systems should be installed on as many of these systems as possible, so you know when they're down remotely. Secondly, staging of generators, pre-storm work, right? Generators should be staged to make sure that those wells, those community water systems and wastewater systems are operational as long as possible, even though they're remote and difficult to get to many times. And third, as many mutual aid discussions that we can have with other utilities to back each other up. The electrics have had it for many years. We don't have quite the same system in place for water and wastewater, but those mutual aid discussions are really important. I'll give you one example, Beaumont, Texas. We sent a team down there, and we were in Beaumont, and that was a very difficult situation, but we were able to put our expertise.
That's my hometown. That's where I grew up.
Yes, sir. They had real trouble, right? 118,000 people out of water.
But of course, the committee saw a broad kind of group before the Transportation Infrastructure Committee today, from a Florida mayor to a representative from the National Resource Defense Council. Now, there were two other notable people, someone from El Paso, Texas, and a representative from California, who talked about the drought, of course, an issue many are facing across the Midwest for really the last couple of years. They talked about desalination plants, water reuse and recycling, and other solutions that they found really beneficial when helping these kind of small communities survive, both having enough drinking water and, of course, disposing of wastewater when it comes to that. One maybe unwelcome piece of news that came out of the committee today, the chairman seemed pretty unwilling to discuss raising funding for these kind of programs. He wanted to focus less on kind of broad resiliency or long-term resiliency and more on simple short-term recovery. So we'll see what this means in terms of funding for infrastructure going forward, but we'll just have to wait and see. Janet?
Well, Sarah, thank you very much for the update. We certainly appreciate it. D.C. Bureau Chief Sarah Mock reporting from our Washington, D.C. News Bureau. Thanks, Sarah.